much, Jackie. So this talk is just a little bit different. Generally speaking, when I talk about classical education for children, and I emphasize the importance of methodology as well as the content or the information. I always say children need to develop the tools of thinking as well as the content format foundation of the arts and sciences. So how one approaches the subject matter changes as the students grow. So, a number of you have heard me before, and I'm always happy to talk about this. You first work on retelling, then on analysis, then on locating an argument, and eventually on constructing and presenting arguments. You don't start out asking a young child to construct an argument or even to analyze a text because he can't do it. His activities have to be consonant with his abilities to get the most from his material. And so I like to talk about how both formation and information are necessary so that how the material is presented and what is presented are both important. Today, I want to talk about that kind of on a different, as it were, trajectory. This is true, what I just said is true about educational format as well, and the environment is one aspect of how material is presented. The environment itself presents a message about the content. I'm old enough, so I remember the phrase, the medium is the message, coined by Marshall McLuhan in 1964. Whatever he had in mind, I know that the quality of the environment in which something is delivered can radically change the message. Maybe it's better to say that it delivers its own message. That's my concern about classroom education, even when the curriculum is a good curriculum. In this talk, I'm not discussing the poorly run public school or some private school with a mind-numbing, disconnected curriculum. There are plenty of reasons to choose homeschooling over those options. I'm not in this talk comparing curricula either. I'm talking about the brick and mortar classical school using an excellent curriculum. Why is schooling at home with the same curriculum better than doing it in a brick and mortar school? That's what I want to address. And my thesis is that classroom schooling is less natural than homeschooling, and in that way opposed to the formation we want to impart. I think the natural way for pre-college education to happen is primarily in a family environment. And I have some caveats, which I will cover later in my talk. But first, I want to present the thesis. Now, if I'm right, if that's true, then however good the content is and however good the teachers are, the environment itself is teaching another message, opposed to the formation intended by the curriculum. And I want to explain why I think that. I recently talked to a formerly homeschooled student, now working on his doctoral dissertation. He had, in the course of the last few years, an opportunity to help out at a local highly rated Orthodox Catholic grade school. His comments on his experience were, why would anyone want to send their children into this dehumanizing environment which prepares them to be shepherded and manipulated for the rest of their lives? It's not as though their time there was limited. These kids are living their lives in their classrooms, not their homes, because it is in the classrooms that they spend most of their waking hours. His remarks made me think. And you know what? I agree with him on both counts. That is, I think the environment is dehumanizing because it's ordered to passivity. And I think that environment is where they live, where they are formed, where they develop into who they will be for the rest of their lives. And again, I'm not talking here and now about the curriculum. I'm happy to do that too, I like to talk about classical Catholic curriculum, but that's not what I'm talking about today. I am, for the sake of this deliberation, taking it for granted that the curriculum is great. I'm talking about the environment. It has always seemed strange to me, even when I was a young student myself, that we should put children in age-segregated groups for all of their early formative years to prepare them for a life where, at least for most people, that will never happen again. Doesn't that seem strange? It seems really weird to me, and it always has, even when I was a student. One book I read not so long ago called Nurture Shock, which was super interesting, calls these age-segregated groups echo chambers, as the students are listening to themselves over and over because they're all the same age and experiencing the same culture. There's no important diversity, no age integration, no significant adult point of view, because the adult in the classroom is simply outnumbered. Classrooms look like factories because they are set up like factories. In a factory, you have people doing the same job over and over with pieces that are as much alike as it is possible to make them in the name of efficiency. In our classrooms, we have children all of the same age, sitting in similar seats with identical desks in front of them, and we have a teacher deliver to them simultaneously, not individually, the same material. We have made the classroom as much like a factory as possible. We are thinking about efficiency, but education is not really efficient in that way. Everyone acknowledges that the most efficient way to teach a single child what he needs to know is one-on-one teaching, which is what happens in homeschooling. Further, in homeschooling, there is always an integration of old and young, something that mirrors and therefore prepares for real life. The family is not an echo chamber. The biggest problem in the classroom model, I think, is that classrooms built on a factory model deliver a factory mentality. I surmise that it was inspired by the Industrial Revolution and probably ordered to actual factories, conditioning children to sit still, doing the same things as the persons around them, waiting patiently when they are done with their task until they are told to move on to the next task, would make the transition from school to factory easy. In the factory, you would again be with the same people doing the same identical thing day after day. You would need to follow orders passively. So the model encourages passivity. And to be passive is not to be fully human. The factory model is not directed to the full use of one's powers. And I'm not saying that teachers and children in a classroom can't overcome this consequence of the model. I'm saying there's something in the model that has to be overcome. Education should be broadening. It should free one from the constraints of ignorance and passion. The environment in which the education is delivered and received should mirror those qualities of freedom. The home environment does that. Children order their own time, at least by the time they're in high school, so they are actively making decisions all day long. They make judgments about whether they are ready to move on or need to study longer. They teach themselves whatever they can, and they get help when they need help. These are radically different models. John Gatto, a former New York Teacher of the Year, New York State Teacher of the Year, who, after his award, took to speaking really frankly about his opinion of schools as institutions, says that the intention with the classroom model is the opposite of self-directed freedom. In his book, Dumbing Us Down, he says, schools are intended to produce, through the application of formulas, formulaic human beings whose behavior can be predicted and controlled. His view is that the classroom model is intended to engineer a product. It is intended to be a vehicle of social engineering. Classrooms produce quiet, orderly, obedient to the herd children. Such products are easily controlled. They think what their neighbors think. Sameness is seen as an asset. Differences are not encouraged. Critical thinking is not encouraged by the model, whatever the curriculum intends. And this is true for several reasons, one of which is that reflection is virtually impossible because there's no unstructured time to think in the classroom. But reflection, which is best accomplished in solitude, is necessary for critical thinking. Dr. Gatto calls the lack of alone time the lesson of one can't hide. One is always watched. Students are under constant surveillance. There are no private spaces. There is no private time. It would be too risky. Also, the classroom model creates intellectual dependency. Good students wait for the teacher to tell them what to do. They learn to wait for other people, better trained than them, to direct them day in and day out. Successful students do what they are told. They do the thinking they are assigned, as Dr. Gatto says, with a minimum of resistance and a decent show of enthusiasm. This trains them to be dependent on their teachers and their schools. This is not how thoughtful leaders are formed. Learning to act independently, making decisions about how to spend one's own time, developing specific interests which are acted upon autonomously, are all ways to learn the skills and virtues that leaders need. In this day and age, particularly, it is important that the Catholic person is willing and able to be different, because to even survive as a Catholic, he will have to be different. If he's going to be part of the restoration, he will have to be equipped as a leader, with a leader's abilities to judge rightly in the circumstances, to think about possible courses of action, and to think outside the box. Those are the intentional goals of our homeschools, and the environment supports them. There are other qualities of the classroom model that contribute to the development of dependence and passivity. Students develop what Gatto calls provisional self-esteem. Anybody who's been in a school, as I have, knows this is true. A student learns that the teachers and the other students won't like him if he doesn't conform, if he doesn't sit still, if he doesn't turn his attention to the next thing when told, if he isn't quiet, if he doesn't line up well, then he causes trouble for the class and he isn't liked. It makes sense, right? Because in a large crowd, it becomes very important that the units in the crowd act in concert. If they don't, there will be chaos. Teaching students that they need to conform teaches them that they need to do what they are told. And this is important for survival. And obedience is a virtue. I mean, I want my kids to do what I tell them to do. Well, I did when they were little, right? It's a virtue. Not all obedience is good. Obedience to rightful authority is freeing. Obedience to the peer group and obedience for the sake of crowd control is not. It teaches students that respect and the self-respect depends on playing the game right and on others' opinions. This is not a model for developing self-confidence, a willingness to strike out on one's own, to take a chance, to do something different. Students define themselves by the good opinion of others, and that opinion has a large measure of how well the student does what he is told in it. And this is, by the way, playing to the weakness of the student. A series of MRI experiments done by a lady named Dr. Abigail Bard at Vassar showed that while adult brain centers that deal with distress and danger light up automatically at the mention of activities like bite down on a light bulb, or swallow a cockroach, or light your hair on fire, or jump off the roof. The same is not true for adolescents. They respond verbally to those prompts in the same way adults do, stating that none of these seem like a good idea, but they don't have the automatic brain response. And those distress centers of the brain don't light up when they're considering those activities. What does cause those distress areas to light up is the thought that their peers might see their answers. In a different series of experiments, teens were asked to answer some innocuous poll questions about items like what kind of music they like and whether they thought Paris Hilton was cool or not. The teens were told that their answer and their username would be displayed to a group of other teens. To this stimulus, the areas of the brain that signaled distress and danger were vibrantly lit. That's also from that Nurture Shock book. Dangerous activities aren't scary to a teen, but other teens' reactions are. I think we're all aware of this from personal experience, but it's interesting to see the experience verified physiologically. We are all sheep who want to do what those around us are doing. But adolescents have that desire at an entirely different level. Putting teens in this situation day after day for most of their waking hours seems like a bad idea. Another issue with the classroom setup of teachers having the job of teaching material to 25 students and then measuring the students' success in achieving mastery of the material is that it leads to students defining themselves by the success they have in reaching the product, which is an A on the report card or paper, or the teacher's praise of their performance. Often, not enough attention is given to the value of the process or the achievement of the knowledge in and of itself. In a study in 1998, a lady named Dr. Carol Dweck, the study was of 30 fifth grade students in a New York grade school. How it was set up was the children were taken into a room one by one and given a set of easy puzzles to solve. They all did well. 15 of those 30 were praised for their intelligence. They were told they were very smart. The other 15 were praised for their effort. They were told, you must have worked really hard. Then the students were given a choice for a second test. They could take a test that would be more difficult than the first, but were told that they would learn a lot from it. Or they could take another test just like the first, an easy test. Of those praised for their effort, 90% chose the harder test. Of those praised for their intelligence, the majority chose the easy test. The interesting thing is that this problem affects even very bright children. I've observed over my now many years of teaching that bright, quick children are often handicapped by the fact that they don't learn how to work hard. Things that come easily, things do come easily, so that's what they're used to and what they expect. Then when they encounter something hard, as everyone will eventually, they don't have a set of tools for dealing with the situation. This book, this Nurture Shock book, enlarged my understanding of that phenomenon. It's not only that they don't know what to do with something intellectually challenging, it's also that they're afraid to try and fail because their self-image is bound up in being smart. Dr. Dweck, who conducted the interesting study I just mentioned and confirmed the results in follow-up studies, said, emphasizing effort gives the child a variable they can control. They come to see themselves as in control of their success. Emphasizing natural intelligence takes it out of the child's control and provides no good recipe for responding to failure. Now, of course, classroom teachers can learn from this to modify what they praise, as can we, parents. But the reason I bring it up here is that in a classroom setting, it's very hard not to have a spotlight on how smart kids are, how good their grades are, how they compare to their fellow students academically, and to measure both achievement and value that way. The classroom situation tends to make students notice intelligence and worry about the product, that is, the grade, rather than the process and the resulting knowledge. They have more to lose by trying something that is hard, but interesting and enlarging. Schooling at home doesn't have the same effect. Not everything is graded. There's lots more opportunity for mastery learning, for the adjustment of presentation, and for just waiting until this individual child is ready. You can't do those things in a classroom. Another quality of the classroom model is that it tends to create anxiety. Partly this is because adjustments to the individual are hard to make, and so the child has to struggle to fit into the mold. But it is also because there is no downtime. There is no unhurried time for reflection. And as we saw, the children are in an anxiety-producing peer group. Anxiety among children is at an all-time high. That's why there are best-selling books like Simplicity Parenting, with the theme that we build our families on the 4 pillars of too much stuff, too many choices, too much information, and too fast. Children have too little unstructured free time and too many expectations. We are afraid that if our children don't learn to read when they are very young, if they don't attend all the possible enrichment classes, if they don't get every possible opportunity for more and better education, if they're not challenged to the max in school, they will somehow fall behind and suffer for the rest of their lives. There is very little evidence, as in none, to support these fears, but we pass them on all the same. So we send our kids to the best schools where the workloads are intense and the expectations are high. In the book, Einstein Never Used Flashcards, Professor Peter Huttenlocher, a pediatric neurologist at the University of Chicago, says his studies have suggested that neurological crowding, which occurs when there is too much information competing for synaptic connections in the brain, can actually slow down the learning process. Dr. Huttenlocher cautions that too much early learning may actually be an impediment rather than a boon to later intelligence. Too high and too intense a workload is probably not a good thing. In Psychology Today, in January 2010, so a while ago, but there was a really interesting article about how the rates of depression and anxiety in young children in the United States have risen over the last 50 to 70 years. 5 to 8 times as many high school and college students meet the criteria for major depression and anxiety as was true 50 years ago. The thesis of the article, which was called Decline of Play and Rise of Children's Mental Disorders, was that anxiety and depression are pronounced in those who do not have a sense of control over their lives. Dr. Peter Gray, author of a book called Freedom to Learn, suggests that this phenomenon is linked to the decline of free play in children's lives. They don't learn self-control because they don't have the opportunity to discover and explore on their own. He says, during the same half century or more that free play has declined, school and school-like activities, such as lessons out of school and adult-directed sports, have risen continuously in prominence. Children today spend more hours per day, more days per year, and more years of their life in school than ever before. More weight is given to tests and grades than ever. Outside of school, children spend more time than ever in settings in which they are directed, protected, catered to, ranked, judged, and rewarded by adults. Given a choice between really learning a subject and getting an A, the great majority of students would, without hesitation, pick the latter, that is, getting the A. Our system of constant testing and evaluation in school, which becomes increasingly intense with every passing year, is a system that clearly substitutes extrinsic rewards and goals for intrinsic ones. It is almost designed to produce anxiety and depression. So this is another area where the homeschooling has a distinct advantage. Our children have time for free play, or they can. We can make that happen. They have to learn self-control and how to engage their siblings productively. They're encouraged to choose to learn for the sake of knowledge and not just a grade. Often, good schools have lots of homework. This contributes to the lesson that John Gatto said was one can't hide, mentioned earlier, as well as to the level of anxiety and the lack of formative downtime. Homework is a type of extended schooling, so that there is always a way in which the student is in school. It means that even at home, children can't be part of the community of their family. They have work to do that is ordered to their real life, their school. Every family that I know who has put their children in school after homeschooling is struck with the toll homework and school activities take on family-centered time and family chores. The student often goes from being an integral and productive member of the family team to being a guest boarder. And this, in spite of the fact that there's adequate research available that homework doesn't really increase academic success. In an article in the Daily Telegraph in 2012, Dr. Richard Walker from Sydney University's education faculty said his research revealed that homework offers no real benefit in primary or junior high school. He said that only senior students in years 11 and 12 can benefit from a reasonable amount of after-school work. What the research shows is that in countries where they spend more time on homework, the achievement results are lower. He went on. The amount of homework is a really critical issue for kids. If they are overloaded, they are not going to be happy and not going to enjoy it. There are other things kids want to do that are very valuable things for them to be doing. One part of that valuable time should be used to form bonds in their family community. As Aristotle said, friendship requires some kind of common life. We have to be working for the same things or loving the same things and striving for them together. Aristotle says to be friends, you have to eat salt together, which is a way of saying you have to live together. Children don't develop the right bonds with their families if they don't spend time with their families. If most of their waking hours, most days, are spent in the classroom, then that is where they form those bonds. One of the mothers I work with said it this way: in school, what you have is kids raising kids, and the strong memories that are being formed are the memories of those classmates, not the family. This encourages a them and us mentality. Generally, us is the peer group with whom the student spends most of his waking hours. Them is the adult, often including the teachers, but certainly including the parents, whose time with their children is very limited. So in schools, your community organization does not include, as part of the integral structure of us, those who actually have common life experiences, as you do in a happy family. When children see their us, their identity, being defined by their family community, as they do when they homeschool, they see themselves as part of an organized structure with siblings and parents all working together toward a common good. This is a better kind of identity to have. Once, when my children were much younger, because they're older, we had some relatives visiting. Dinner time was approaching, and I suddenly realized what the time was. Happened to me a lot. Oh no, I said to my children, I need to get the house picked up and make dinner, and there just isn't enough time. What am I going to do? Don't worry, Mom, my eldest organizer said. We'll get things picked up and I'll set the table. You just worry about the dinner. Then she delegated chores. Everybody helped cheerfully, and we were done in time. My visiting relative took me aside later and told me she was going to homeschool. She said, I was glad, but I was surprised because we hadn't talked about homeschooling. She said, I don't know how to homeschool, but I'll do whatever it takes. Sorry, you know me. Yeah, she said, I want my children to be that willing to help for the sake of the family. She said that she had recently been visiting elsewhere with a family whose children went to school. The children were pretty good, but if a situation arose where one or another members of the family needed help, the general response was, too bad, but that's your problem. I've got my own problem. And this kind of them and us mentality happens in the small classical schools as well as the big public schools because it's built into the model. One of my students decided, somebody I worked with in Mother of Divine Grace, decided to try out one of those schools. It was a good school with a good curriculum and caring teachers. This girl told me later about a number of her experiences, but one really stood out to me. She joined a group eating lunch out at a picnic table. Everyone had their sack lunches, most likely prepared by their mothers. The conversation around the table consisted of each child talking about his or her crazy mother. They each tried to top the last speaker. If you think that's bad, listen to this. The conversation worked its way around to my student, who said anxiously, because she knew this wasn't going to go over well, I like my mother. She was a social outcast from that point on. To survive socially, she needed to do what the others did and adopt their point of view. And their point of view was that we are us and the adults are them. And this is, of course, a problem in another way. The people you are most forming bonds with won't continue to be part of your life. Children learn not to depend on the attachments they form because those friends will not continue to be their friends. They learn to value their associations with their teachers, and then the teachers are gone when the student moves into the next year. This is not a good model for family life. It teaches children that the attachments they form with the people with whom they live are not lasting. They don't expect their intimate companions to be a permanent part of their lives. This is radically different than family interactions. Brothers and sisters are brothers and sisters for life. Friends come and go. The whole classroom model is bad socially. Parents don't teach their children, so then they think they can't teach. So they think they need others, and they turn over the formation of their children to experts. It becomes the norm for children to be away from their parents most of their time. The family unit is disrupted. We think that's normal, right? Because most of us grew up that way. But if you stand back and look at it objectively, doesn't it seem very strange? Parents are uninvolved in their own children's formation. Even when it's a good formation, that seems like a bad idea. Having classes from subject matter experts seems good to me at the appropriate time. But children don't need to go to school for that to happen. Mother of Divine Grace has learning support classes for that reason, and one can arrange local co-op classes that meet once a week to achieve a like goal. They don't need to turn over their lives to strangers, however nice the strangers may be. When we look at our dysfunctional society and the breakdown in family life, there are many factors to blame. I know that. But one place we should be looking is at the classroom model of education. Sadly, as the young man I mentioned at the beginning of this talk pointed out, for many children, school is their life because it is the activity to which they give the most consistent time. There are 168 hours in a week. Children sleep about 56 hours per week, 8 hours a day. The current average for how much television is watched is 28 hours a week. There is the time getting ready for school and traveling to and from school, depending on where you go and who it is, varying amounts of time, but you might estimate about 7 hours a week for that. And then there's homework. Let's say they spend 7 hours a week on that, though I know some children spend more. They need time to eat. The family dinners are out of favor these days, so there probably isn't a lot of time spent on meals. Let's say it's 4. But the children are in school 30 hours a week, the largest portion of their waking time. And if you put all those numbers together, you'll see that leaves 36 hours a week. That's not taken up with one of these activities I mentioned. If you add in private lessons of some kind, however, or sports, we cut that time down further. There's not much time left over for children to follow their interests or even determine what those interests are. There isn't much time to read for fun or engage in conversation or be bored and thus forced to explore possibility. We let our children live their lives like little ants with everything pre-programmed. And that's why we create dependent human beings. In past ages, children did not live their lives at school and in programmed activities, even if they went to school, because the time there was a small proportion of their total time. Think about Laura Ingalls Wilder's experience in the Little House books. School was only 3 months of the year. That was all the time that could be afforded for school. The students had other important jobs within their families. They were needed, integral members of the family community. Once there were factories and two-income families with both parents working, children needed to be taken care of. They needed to be supervised by someone other than their parents. School became daycare, and children were being raised by their teachers and their peers. Before that time, many things were very different in the United States, which is, of course, where I'm from, where people thought for themselves. They were educated individuals. They were inventive, confident, and able to think critically. According to John Gatto, who I referred to earlier, in his book, Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Education, Compulsory Schooling. Some studies suggest that at the time of the American Revolution, at least for non-slaves on the Eastern Seaboard, literacy was close to total. A 5th grade math or rhetoric textbook from 1850 has what we would consider college level material in it. Senator Ted Kennedy, who's not on my page generally, his office released a paper in 1990 claiming that prior to compulsory education, the state literacy rate was 98%. And after that, it never exceeded 91%. Isn't that interesting? Living at school has actually made us less educated. And that's not just due to lousy materials. We have forced our children to live in and grow up in an unnatural situation. They are artificially put in age-segregated, confined areas where everyone's supposed to do the same task at the same time. This is not a preparation for life, certainly not for family life, which is where most people's earthly happiness is to be found. Children escape by daydreaming, by losing focus, by disconnecting from the present situation. Good teachers work to engage the children, but the environment is working against them. The best teachers and schools try to bring more real life scenarios into the classroom. In Finland, students in a classroom are provided, at least they were, 15-minute breaks after every 45-minute class period. They have less time in the classroom than Americans do, nearly 300 fewer hours per year in elementary school, but they outperform them academically, at least as measured by the Program for International Student Assessment, a standardized test given to 15 and 16-year-olds in 65 nations and territories around the world. Dr. Pellegrini, author of Recess, Its Role in Education and Development, has done a series of experiments to explore the relationship between recess timing and attentiveness in the classroom. In every experiment, students were more attentive, not surprisingly, after a break than before. My only point here is that sometimes less is more. Fewer hours in the classroom and more time for free play are easy to arrange when you homeschool. There's not only been an upsurge in anxiety in children over the last 70 years or so, there's also been a significant increase in ADHD and in vision issues. One wonders what more free play time would do to mitigate those problems. Dr. Stephen Kamada says in a 2016 article in Psychology Today that the point here is that US schools are pushing students beyond their skill levels while forcing them to complete endless and mindless worksheet. This perfect storm of rigid instruction at ever younger ages and an inflexible one-size-fits-all Common Core curriculum may actually be contributing to the ADHD epidemic. Little children just don't do well sitting in the same chair for long periods of time. It's not natural for their bodies, which are being formed or should be being formed by use. They should be climbing trees, playing jacks, and jumping rope, not sitting in chairs. If they did, the vision problems would often clear up too. I have regularly thought that when people say that homeschool children aren't living in the real world, they just haven't reflected on what the real world is. Some years ago, I read a newspaper article about an innovative program put into practice in a public school in my area. Each student in the school was assigned to a family group, with a staff member as parent, with a mixture of children from other grades as siblings. This group got together for 30 to 45 minutes per month. The idea was to give students a sense of responsibility and create a climate of stewardship. The principal hoped that it would encourage younger students to look up to older students and to have older students take care of younger students. I thought the most telling part of the whole article was the last sentence. Special needs students and GATE students are likewise assigned to families on a random basis, thus creating heterogeneous families and a mini picture of the real world. That's right. Our children, our homeschooled children, are living in the real world. And it's a world that encourages responsibility, a sense of stewardship, and teaches them how to get along in a family. Classrooms are not achieving those goals. All good teachers are working toward the better model. They encourage more discussion, more responsibility, more activity. But they have to work against their situation. They try to reach all the students. They try to individuate instruction. But in a classroom, that's hard to do. Out of the 20 or so students, there will be a couple of quick, bright kids who can't be encouraged to talk too much because the other students will get lost. They learn not to try too hard. There will be the few children who are struggling and the student can't key his lessons, and the teacher can't key his lessons to them because he will lose everybody else. They learn that they aren't going to learn. The teacher tries to aim for the middle, inevitably losing both ends, and even so can't connect with all those average kids because they aren't all alike. It's the problem in the situation. All of this operates against the lessons we should want. And in the small classical school do actually want for our children. The medium itself contravenes the content of their lessons. Classical education is ordered to making men free, able to direct themselves and the life of the community. The content is, in my opinion, much better suited to a more natural environment where responsibility, time management, and good decision-making are all integral to the situation. Homeschooling has those qualities built in. I understand that it has its own difficulties, but in home education, students are necessarily encouraged to take charge, to investigate, to share, to manage time, and to self-evaluate. They learn to make judgments about what they have learned and if they need to do more. They are encouraged to develop independently while interacting in a family situation. Don't misunderstand me. I am not an advocate of unschooling or of child-directed education, nor am I opposed to classes with teachers, and I am passionately in favor of classical education. I think parents know more about what children need than children do. And I think it is very important for a person to learn to study something that at first sight looks uninteresting. I think having subject matter experts in a child's life is a blessing. I approve of classes for children, as long as they're not all day, every day. Further, I agree, of course, with the church that having Catholic schools for children to go to is essential because not all parents are able to homeschool their children. And even those that are may not be able to for all of their children's secondary education. In those cases, I think the small classical school down the block is an answer to prayer. Additionally, I know that some classes are better than others and that some teachers and administrators are aware of of what in the classroom model needs to be modified. What I am opposed to is having children spend most of their waking hours away from their families, essentially growing up in a classroom with other kids exactly their same age being their primary teachers when they don't have to. I'm opposed to the dehumanization of treating these individuals as though they were all alike and should learn the same things at the same pace from the same presentation. I'm opposed to the necessary passivity of their learning, given their situation. It is my view and my experience that homeschooling provides better education. It easily allows for mastery learning and differentiated instruction. It easily allows for a differentiated curriculum for different members of the family. It promotes a more comradely view of education. It provides opportunities for everyone to learn together in a non-age segregated way. Children learn the essential skills of time management and responsibility, which I acknowledge can happen in a brick and mortar school too. But with homeschooling, you truly have the best of both worlds and avoid the lessons I have been discussing that are taught by the classroom model. With homeschooling, students have a home life, a natural learning situation that encourages them to be active in their education, with subject matter experts as needed, and meetings with other students arranged for specific purposes. Some homeschooling moms have pointed out that in high school, students benefit from the competition and camaraderie of other students studying the same material. I think that's true. That's why in Mother's Mind Grace, we have the online learning support classes. Also, as I mentioned earlier, homeschool high school students often do well getting together in small local groups for specific subjects and undertaking service projects together. That seems appropriate to me. But it's not a way of life. It's an intentionally chosen adjunct to what is a way of life, namely learning in the midst of family life. Thank you. So there you go. Yeah, I really believe everything I said there. I really believe it. And I've been thinking about this and watching homeschooling. I homeschooled my kids. I've watched other people homeschool their kids. I really believe it. Recognize that it sounds a little out there, but I think it's true. And I think, you know, God has given us an opportunity. You wouldn't be here if you weren't actually thinking about this. I do think, I really, truly, in my heart, think God is calling people to do something else. We're in a mess. Society is a mess. Children are suffering, families are suffering. We've got a mess to deal with. And if you've read the books I've read, you know that God just calls individual people, you know, just regular, normal, ordinary people, and says, I've got a job for you. So I cry easily. I'm sorry.
It's beautiful. Your passion is
I am passionate.
It's
beautiful. Passionate.
Yeah. Your compassion and your passion is absolutely beautiful.
Thanks, Jackie. But I really think this is important, and I think you wouldn't be here listening to it if God weren't speaking to you. I really think it's important.
And I think
we're being called
now more than ever. Yeah. Now more than ever.
Now more than ever. I could not agree more. Things get worse and worse. You know, it's only in the family, right? God speaks through families. You know, and it's different to be a Berquist than it is to be an Askow. That's a good thing. That's a strength. That's what you want. These schools where everybody's just homogenized, they're all the same, right? You just make everybody be the same. That's crazy. That's not the way we're supposed to live. We're supposed to, you know, help each other, right? I have something to give you, you have something to give me. That's the idea. We don't all want to be the same. Our poor kids are just stuck in these, you know, factory model institutions. Not good. Not a good thing.
You're saying they could listen to you all night. I know. So much sense.
That because, you know, I really have been thinking about this for a very long time, right? I actually, I mean, I knew that I didn't want my kids to have the education I had. It wasn't good. I mean, so, you know, then I through high school, then I went to TAC, Thomas Aquinas College. That was a good education. I wanted my children to do that. So I thought about what can I do to help them to get there? And first we started trying, to start a little school. That was better, but it still wasn't the same because my kids are not your kids. Your kids are not my kids. Yet, we're all human beings and we want to educate our children in the truth, right? That's common. But how you do it and how I do it, that's not exactly the same. You've got your family, I've got my family. And so we work together to create a community of like-minded people who are trying to raise their children to actually be formed in the good, true, and beautiful. And there's real stuff out there that you can do that with. That's what we want for our children. And we want it for society. So there's this thing about each of our families, each of our family units are part of a larger community, right? And we're ordered to that larger community because every part is ordered to a whole, right? So the family is a kind of whole, but it belongs to a society, and the society is a larger whole. We're ordered to it, not as though we were, ants in an anthill, but as being parts of a larger whole that is intended to give glory to God. That is what we are doing here. That's what this is about. And you want to equip your children to be intentionally ordered to that larger whole. That's what right? We want them to go to heaven. That's the whole point. There isn't, yeah.
You're good.
So, yeah, I'm not going to try so easily, but I'm passionate. I really think this. I've given my life to it. I think it's really important.